Today, Senate Republicans approved roughly $70 billion in immigration funding, keeping money flowing to ICE through the rest of the president's time in office. It comes as the agency is facing new pressure to improve its conditions at detention facilities after reports of inhumane conditions and at least 18 deaths already this year. And now ICE is set to stop reporting deaths that happen within 30 days of people being released from its custody. That's according to an internal memo sent to employees and reviewed by the Washington Post. Joining me now is Post reporter behind that story, Douglas McMillon, and Charles Coleman, former Brooklyn prosecutor, civil rights attorney, and MS Now legal analyst and host of Charles Coleman podcast. Douglas, take us inside your reporting and what ICE is saying about this policy change. Why'd they do this?
Well, ICE says that this is common sense, that people who die that are no longer in their custody, they shouldn't have to do investigations or reporting about those deaths. But this is a policy that was put in place in 2021 under the Biden administration, and the whole idea was accountability. There are a number of steps that ICE is required to take to be accountable for the deaths of the people in its care. And back in 2014, Congress required them to start reporting all deaths to Congress. In 2018, ICE issued guidance that they would have to publicly report some investigations into their deaths in custody. But in 2021, ICE issued new guidance which said essentially they were worried that ICE was releasing people who were sick, who they didn't want to have to investigate, or they didn't want those deaths to count in their death toll. So they put in place this measure. All deaths within 30 days of release would have to be investigated, reported by ICE. And this is the policy now that the Trump administration is doing away with.
So, Charles, what does this policy change mean for ICE detainees, for their families, and for any kind of legal recourse?
Well, Ariel, the problem with this is that suing the federal government is already difficult enough. And what you need when you're trying to bring that sort of case is a mountain of evidence procedurally to display that there has been an absence of care or a violation of the actual standard of care, which is necessary in a case like this. With these policies changing in this way, they're not going to have that. Plaintiffs who are aggrieved, whose family members have been wrongfully treated or who have actually passed away from poor care while in ICE custody are not going to have the type of evidence that they need to bring forward a case. So it significantly hampers an already difficult situation in trying to sue the federal government. Now they're not even going to have the evidence that they need to substantiate their claims.
So, Douglas, what kind of loopholes does this open for the agency in reporting deaths?
Well, you know, this could be a way of managing their numbers. The numbers of deaths in ICE custody is rising. There have already been 18 reported just in the first 5 months of this year, and that's in addition to the 30 plus that were reported last year under the Trump administration. That number is set to make a new record this year, and it's becoming more and more, I think, of a part of the public discourse about ICE and their tactics, and I think it's becoming a problem for this administration. So what this could be part of is them trying to manage their numbers, and we don't have any evidence that this is their motivation yet, but we do know that there have been accusations in the past years, and this is part of the reason why this policy was put in place, that ICE would have detainees who were very sick, who were likely to die in the hospital, and that they would release those people from custody so that they would no longer have to be accountable for those deaths. So the problem with this is, you know, this could help ICE manage their numbers. The problem with this is, in addition to what your other guest pointed out, is that the accountability mechanism is supposed to help the system get better. When there's a death in custody and there's a problem with medical care, ICE and the government are supposed to investigate why that problem happened and try to figure out how they make it better. If they're no longer able to investigate deaths that happen outside of their custody, they cannot get to the bottom of why those things happened.
So, you know, we talk about deaths, Charles. There's an investigation from Associated Press and KFF Health News that found hundreds of detainees across at least 33 states allege that they're not being given adequate medical care. That includes not getting medications for high blood pressure, epilepsy, untreated cancer, and seizures. What rights do detainees have, and how could this new policy violate them?
Well, the standard of care with respect to prisoners' rights in health care is a little murky because it differs from place to place. So even at the federal level, the jurisdictions change in terms of how that care is supposed to be administered versus what happens at the state level. That being said, when it comes to life-saving medications, when it comes to the medications that you need, these sorts of things that you mentioned, high blood pressure, insulin for diabetics, things of that nature, The government and people who are the government is responsible for providing that for people who are detainees, for people who have been arrested or are being held in custody, because these are effectively life-saving drugs that they need to sustain their lives. So this treatment is not something that can be denied. It's not something that's supposed to be denied. So with every instance that we are talking about, Ariel, there is a level of exposure for the federal government that I believe that this policy change is intended to try to skirt around. What Doug talking about, we don't know for certain that changing the numbers or avoiding certain numbers is the motivation behind this, but it certainly does lean to that point.